Hey, look to the person beside you. Go ahead and give them a nod and a wink or something. Just go ahead and give somebody a wink or a nod. I'll give you some brownie points this morning. Go ahead and nod at somebody. Tell them good morning. And then you can go ahead and look at your second choice and give them a nod too. You don't want to exclude anyone, so go ahead and look the other direction. You don't want to miss anyone here this morning. I want to say welcome to you. My name is Benji, Rowland. It's an honor to be here. I want to welcome those who are watching online as well. It's interesting this morning. It's a little bit chilly outside. We were packing our clothes to come, and Brittany was like, well, it's been like 85, 90 degrees down in Georgia this week, so we're going to pack like kids' shorts and like dresses and things like that. And then we get here, and it ends up being in the 50s this morning. So you're welcome for that. We brought a little bit of cool weather with us to give to you. I think it's going to get a little cooler tonight, so that's good. But I love Journey Church. I love what we stand for here as a church. To reach people who are where? Far from God. To embrace the journey to what? To live for who? To God. To love people and to what? Serve the world. I'm so thankful to be a part of that and allow God to work in and through our lives in that way. It's an honor to be able to be here this weekend. My wife Brittany is in the room along with our kids are in Journeytown, and Brittany's sister and Cindy and Terry are here, so we're so thankful that they could come and hang out with us as well. But it's just an honor to have all of you here visiting with us as we're able to come together and worship. I mean, and as we're in a series talking about all in, I mean, Josh is like here leading worship this morning, and he just had a baby. So as being all in after you haven't had much sleep, welcome to fatherhood. Him and his wife Kristen. But so thankful that things went well there. But he alluded to something when he was talking. And he had no idea what I was going to be talking about this morning, but he said our plans, we had all of our plans to do this, and then it happened completely differently than what he had plans for, the way he thought that it would happen. And isn't that how life goes? So many times. We're in this series called All In. I've been following along for the past few weeks. We talked about holiness. We've talked about commitment. We've talked about being committed to go out and witness to others and do whatever it takes to bring people to Jesus. And be fully committed to that. Here's what I know. Whether you believe this or not and where you are on your spiritual journey, every one of us in this room, God's called you to a unique task. God has a unique design in creating you. He has a purpose for you to feel. He has something that He wants you to do with your life. And we respond to that. And so this series, we've been talking about going all what? All in. Well, here's what I know about all in. Normally, when you decide to go all in, this is where you hit your first roadblock. I'll never forget, Wakeona. I was in elementary school. We had a track behind the school back there, and I remember signing up to run track and to run around for like field day or whatever it was, and I was pretty fast, and so I was going to sign up for the long run. I was like, well, the others are taken, so I'm going to sign up for this one. I'll never forget on field day, we got there around the track, and all the teachers' cars were parked in the middle, but they'd moved them. All these kids were there, and so everybody in the school's watching. And I get down to run track, and I'm like, run around the track a couple of times. I'm like, okay, this is it. You know, man, this is my time to shine. And I was ready to go, had my right tennis shoes on, right? You're ready to run. I'll never forget when they said, on your mark, get set, go. I took off around the track, and, you know, you get a quarter of a way down, and part of what slows you down because you're looking back watching everybody, right? Like, see where everybody's at. And I'll never forget, I made a first turn, and I kind of glanced back and noticed everybody was kind of far back, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to get this. Like, I'm actually going to win this race. I get around the first lap, and all of a sudden there's this like pain in my stomach, which is called out of shape if you've never experienced that before. But my stomach started like cramping up. I'm like, oh no, this ain't good. And nobody warned me that you probably shouldn't eat a lot of breakfast on the day you decide to run really hard. So I was running really fast, ran around. I got around the first time, and I looked back, and I was ahead of everybody. And then I come to a point where I couldn't run. I stopped, and I puked everywhere. Eggs, grits, bacon, all of it, all over. I mean, and people are running on the track like trying to hurdle. Now it's become a hurdle because they're trying to get over it or around it or whatever it may be. And you're like, please, just don't give me the details. Just tell me the story. But it was disgusting, and everybody in the school watched that happen. That's not what I had planned in my mind. That's not how that went around that morning when I got up. But yet that's the very thing that happened, because as soon as I decided to go all in, I went full speed. And as a result, it hit me pretty quick. I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. And I ended up stopping in that moment and then got my composure and was able to start back again. And what I want to tell you is this, is anytime you decide to go all in and say, God, I want to be used, don't you find that that's most often the times that when Satan throws everything up in front of you? Like, man, I'm all in. I'm going to eat healthy. And then you get a phone call. Hey, we're going to the buffet. You coming? Like, man, I'm gonna start giving. I'm going to start tithing of my resources. And then something happens. Something breaks. You're like, man, how am I going to do this? It seems like any time we decide to go all in is the very moment where something happens. So what I want to talk about this morning, as we live the life that God's called us to live, to be all in, you need to recognize the signs and when things happen and how to see it, the way that you and I need to see it and understand what it is that's going on, because many times when those things happen, we begin to question and think God's mad at us. Well, God's mad at me. God must not be happy with me. God's allowing this to happen, and he's getting even, or he's punishing me. And here I am trying to do what's right, or here I am trying to commit to this and go in this direction. However, the truth is, God allows those problems to happen in our life. It's not that he causes them. I cause my problems. I do. People can cause me problems. The devil can cause me problems. But God uses problems. God uses those things in our life. God uses those things to develop us, to equip us. So regardless of the source, you need to realize God wants to use that. And so when you go all in and you hit that first bump, I want to talk this morning about how to push through the bump and not quit and start over again, but to push through it to get to the next level in your walk with Christ and where God wants to take you. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13 says, Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Don't think that it's strange when something difficult happens, when you face these trials. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. And you say, hey, I don't do well putting the word joy and like trials in the same sentence. Like I don't feel joy. I'm not overjoyed when I'm facing trials. I'm not overjoyed when I'm facing suffering. But God's not in heaven. I want you to see this. God's not in heaven enjoying watching you go through these trials. From God's view, he's not watching on DVR. Man, Rowland messed that one up. Click, man, let me watch this again. Man, it's not like replaying a crazy YouTube video over and over and over. God's not laughing and getting a kick out of your mistakes and mocking you. He wants what's best for you. There's a purpose behind those bumps that you face when you go all in. There's a purpose behind those trials. And what I want us to see this morning is if you don't get that, you'll live a very miserable life. Because every time you hit a bump in the road, you're going to be miserable. And you're going to play the blame game. And you're going to look everywhere else instead of where you need to be. And so we have to get to a place where we realize that. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 33 says, For he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone. God's not willingly just wanting to punish you, to bring grief into your life. That's not the way that works. And so there's a couple of things I want you to be able to identify this morning. And so if you're taking notes, you can write them down, take pictures of the screen, however you do it to get these 5 things. But there's 5 things I believe that we can learn anytime we go all in and we push it all in and we say, I'm going forward, I'm going to do what it is I think I need to do here. And you move forward in that direction, there's 5 things that we need to realize when we hit that first bump. When you make the first lap and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can make it. Something happens. So whether it's serving, giving, whatever it may be in a relationship, whatever it is, I want you to see these. Number 1 is this, is God can allow that to be an opportunity to provide direction for your life. An opportunity to provide direction. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9 says, In their hearts, humans plan their what? Their course. So in our hearts, this is one of my favorite verses and when you grasp this, it helps to understand life a little better. In their hearts, humans plan their course. We should plan our course. You should plan your course out for life, your retirement. How am I going to live this out? Your priorities, your vision, your dreams, your desires. All of those things, you should plan those out. That's important. But the Lord is the one who does what? Establishes the steps. So in other words, my plans is that I put out a map. but God's the one who directs my steps across the map. I can lay the map out all day long, but God is the one who directs my steps along the way. So He's the one who establishes them or directs them. So how does God direct you when you're the ones making the plans? How does God establish your steps when you're the ones making the plans for your life? There's one word there. You can write this down. How does God direct when you're the one making the plans? It's problems. Problems change your plans. Problems redirect what you've got planned to do, right? On the way here, there was traffic. It's got heavy traffic, and my phone would redirect my plans to get me around that. It would redirect and recalculate and get me in a different direction to try to avoid the wreck or the traffic there. You know, we set the path and we set the place we want to go, and we map it all out, but then God's the one who directs every step, and He directs it through problems. Proverbs 20:30 says, blows and wounds scrub away evil, and beatings purge the inmost being. God allows those things to happen in our lives. He redirects our paths with those things. Sometimes the lessons that we learn in life, we learn from being burned. We learn from the mistakes. We learn from the pain of it. And God says, I want to use that to establish you. I want to use that to direct your life. Because many times we won't change until we hit rock bottom. Change doesn't happen. We would rarely change if we never felt pain. You ever thought about that? I would rarely change if I never felt any pain. If there was no pain or no problem, then I'd stay on the same path and never make any changes. And we have to realize we often, change comes through the problems. Prodigal son, he was on the wrong path, right? He was all in, but he was all in the wrong direction. Spin it all. Hit rock bottom. Jonah, right? He was all in, but he was in the wrong direction. And God used it to direct him back in the right path. David, he was all into what he was doing, but he was in the wrong direction. And God used that in his life to redirect. But we'd rarely change if there was not any pain or problems. In fact, we ignore illnesses when they don't hurt. That's why many times someone's sick on the inside and they don't know it, and they haven't went to the doctor to get any checkups, and then one day they show up and there's something going on, and they go and they say, well, you've had this for years, and it's been a silent killer in their body, and they didn't know it. But there was no change provided because they didn't feel it. They didn't know it. They weren't aware of it. So many times when problems hit, when we say, God, I'm all in here, and the first roadblock hits, you say, God, how are you wanting to direct me in this situation? How do you want to direct me on this map that I've created for life, and I've set these plans here, but you're the one that directs me. Number 2 is this. God sees this as a way not only to provide direction for you, but also a way to provide examination. Every one of us needs to be examined in our walk with Christ. God desires to check us out, to do a spiritual checkup on us, to check our character, our integrity, our motives, who we are, our thoughts, to show us what's on the inside, what's going on in the heart. Jeremiah 17:10 says, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. In other words, God will use problems and those bumps that we have when we're trying to push forward. He allows them to do that in our life, to examine where we are and what we're doing. Job chapter 7, verses 17 and 18. This is an interesting verse. What is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much what? Attention. That you examine them how often? Every morning, and test them how often? Every moment. You ever thought about that? That God examines us every morning, and He tests us with every moment. Every part of our life is a test. That God is examining our hearts. Why does God do this? Because He's more interested in your integrity and who you are on the inside than He is with what you're trying to portray on the outside and what you look like in front of everyone else or in front of social media or whatever that may be. And so when we hit those road bumps, it may be that God's examining our heart, just checking our heart up to preparing us for the road that He has as we move all in. Proverbs 16:2 says, all a person's ways seem pure to them. I can make my ways seem pure. I can. We can all do the best of that, right? We can make whatever, we can justify. How many is good at justification for what you want to buy or what you want to do, right? I mean, I can sell it. Doesn't make it right. But the motives are weighed by God. Why? Because my heart is deceitful. And therefore, I have to monitor that. We've talked about that for many years. We have to monitor our heart. Remember the story. We've looked at the story before, the Israelites in the Old Testament, right? They were set free from captivity. They were in slavery. They were set free. Once they were set free from that, then they went on this journey. They went to the Red Sea, faced that. They were able to walk through that journey together and make it through that. What was the next step? Then they went over to Mount Sinai. They got the Ten Commandments. All these things are happening. Then they get to the desert. And what should have only been a couple of weeks took how long? How long? 40 years. Why? Because they kept failing the test over and over again. My question is this: how many of you in here this morning, or maybe you're watching online, you feel like that's the pattern in your life? You fail the same test over and over again. And we have to examine our hearts and say, why is this happening? And God's saying, hey, will you trust me? Will you obey me? Will you walk through this and let me teach you something? I need to confess to you. Many of you know this because you've been around me. I'm not a good cook. I don't cook a whole lot. Like, I've learned over the years in Tifton from some of the grill masters here how to grill. Like, I've learned how to grill, so I'm good there. But, man, in college, it was ramen noodles all the time. Like, that's what I learned until I met my wife, Brittany, and her mom and the family and all that good cooking they would have. Man, it was ramen. It was like ramen noodles with peas, and I'm going to add cheese. And I would come up with creative ways to eat those. I mean, that's how I operated. I was not a very good cook. But one thing I could make, and that's tea. Some of you laugh. I know how to boil tea. But here's what you know. If you've ever boiled tea before. How many have ever boiled tea before? Raise your hand. And if their hand's not up, then take them out today and go teach them how to do that. They need to learn how to make tea. But how do you learn what is inside the tea bag? You can't squeeze it. You can't. How do you find out what's inside the tea bag? What do you have to do? You put it in hot water. And when you put it in hot water, eventually the inside begins to reveal itself. Sometimes God allows us to go, when we move all in and we move, God allows us to walk into hot water because it reveals who we really are. And things maybe we need to work on in our own lives. Isaiah 48:10 says, see, I have refined you, not as silver. I've tested you in the furnace of affliction. And some of you are going through suffering right now, and I don't know why. It may be something that you caused or someone else caused. It may be you hit that first bump, man, I'm all in, I'm going to serve, and then that happened, and you're like, man, why am I having to go through this trial? I don't know what I'm going to do. My encouragement to you is this: when you face those opportunities, when you face those trials, that suffering or whatever it may look like for you, not to ask the question of why, but ask the question what. Spiritual development. And God, not why is this happening to me? That's our natural response. But God, what are you trying to teach me in this moment? This past Sunday evening, I got a text message or a social media message from this individual. And they told me their story, and they said, this morning, I want to share with you what happened. They went to tell me the story how they'd been begging their mom to come to church and didn't think she was going to come, and then begging her to come to restore the relationship and for God to work in some things, and just begging her to come. And she said, I want to let you know, she came with me this morning. And when we walked out of the church, my mom looked at me and said, thank you for making me come. My life changed this morning. And I thought, man, that's good. I mean, to see God moving in that kind of way, and whenever you're able to watch that happen, it's just powerful moments to see. Fast forward a few hours. Monday morning, I'm in the kitchen, and I get a phone call. When I get this phone call, I look at the phone, and I'm like, I kind of knew what was happening. For those of you who don't know, that we left a couple of months ago to help a church plant that was struggling in Tennessee, West Tennessee, and to get some things developed and to grow and move forward and reach the community. And when we moved there, we couldn't find a place to live. And we kept looking and kept looking. There was not a lot of options. And we finally found a house. I began to research houses that had been on the market for more than a year to see if somebody would be willing to rent it. And we found the house that had been on the market for 2 years. Nobody had even looked at it, really. 2 years. So we moved in it, set up camp, and this past Monday morning, I get a phone call letting me know that the house sold, and I've got about 2 months to get out. My kids just getting accustomed to being in a different home altogether, in a different community. And for a moment, I was very upset. And I thought, God, I got to practice what I'm preaching, and I got to respond from a not, why is this happening? But God, what are you teaching me in this moment? Like, what do you want to do in my family? What are you doing in me? What are you doing in this moment that we felt called to do this? And we have a home that we've started renting, and now 2 months in, we've got to move out after Christmas. And that's hard, because when you're the leader of your home and you've got your kids involved in that, it's very difficult. It's a difficult process to walk through. But our response to grow spiritually is not, why is this problem happening? But it always must be, God, what are you doing in this moment with me? What are you teaching me in this moment? Because it may be that God is longing to provide and examine your heart and provide an examination of who you are, to reveal things in your own life, to be able to develop you spiritually for the next season, and what he wants to do in your growth as you continue to grow as a Christ follower. And so you guys be praying for that. My kids don't know that yet. They're in Journeytown, and we're not wanting them to know that until we know what we're going to do with the next steps. But you don't ever know when things like that happen. You know, Hurricane Michael destroyed many homes. Things like that happen, and we want to say, God, why? But I think that's the wrong response. I think the response is what? God, what are you doing? I trust you. I'm all in. I'm doing what you want me to do. I was surrendering to this. God, I'm serving in this capacity. I'm giving of my resources, and this happens. God, what are you trying to teach me? To trust him. Number 3, very quickly. God sees this as an opportunity also to provide correction. This is difficult. This is a difficult one to swallow. It's a difficult one. None of us like to be corrected, right? We correct our kids, but none of us like to be corrected. I'm just going to look at one verse here in verse 8, and then I'm going to go on with this for time. But in Hebrews chapter 12, just in verse 8, it says, if you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, this is a unique verse here, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Now, first of all, I want you to understand this. There's a difference between correction and punishment. As a parent, we have to realize this. Punishment is what? Punishment reflects on the past. Correction points them to the future. You've got to have both, right? You can't just punish someone and not provide correction. And so punishment is guilt-driven. It's based on what happened. Hey, this is what happened. This is why this is why you can't play Fortnite tonight. This is why you can't play the video game, or this is why you can't do this. There's punishment, but then the correction is, but this is how we move forward. You've always got to be able to provide both, because it's two different things. But I can't discipline your kids. I saw a video this past week of that, and someone disciplined someone else's child, and that doesn't work. If I discipline your kids, or if I'm in Walmart or the Publix or somewhere, and some kid's acting a fool, and I go disciplining him, look at somebody beside you right now and say, that's not good. He's going to jail. Like, that's not going to happen. I can't do that, but I can discipline who? My own kids. All 3 of them would testify to that this morning. Yeah, Daddy can discipline us. Why? Because they're a part of my family. And that's how God works in our life. It's part of the proof that you're in God's family, by the way. If you can live in sin and continue to live in sin and continue to live in sin and don't find any correction happening, you may want to question whether or not you're a part of the family of God. Because anytime we sin and we're out of God's will, he's going to provide correction if we're in the family. And so we need to ask the question and do the spiritual checkup. Job 5:17 says, blessed is the one whom God corrects and does not despise the discipline of the Almighty. Chapter 36, verse 15 says, but those who suffer, he delivers in their suffering. He speaks to them in their afflictions. God works through us in those moments. Sometimes, I was talking about taking something away from our kids to provide punishment or correction. Sometimes we don't know the value of something until we lose it. I'll never forget when we bought a house here in Tifton, it didn't have a microwave. And I told Brittany, I said, who needs a microwave? Like, we don't need a microwave, but the first time I had to warm up my coffee in the oven, it didn't go over too well. I spilled it all in the oven, and guess who had to clean it up? Right? We had and multiple times, and finally it came to the point I said, okay, we need a microwave. We're going to get a microwave. We got to have a microwave. Sometimes it's with our health. You don't really recognize the value of it until you don't have it. Or a relationship, or possessions. Sometimes we learn the value of those things by losing them. And so we have to ask God, what are you trying to teach me in this moment? What are you teaching my family about dependency upon you? What are you teaching my family about obedience? God, what do you want to do in this moment in providing correction? And so don't ask why. Look to somebody beside you and tell them, don't ask why. Don't do it. Don't ask why. It's in our flesh. It's our natural desire to want to know why. We're curious people. We're nosy. But it's not the right question. And you're never going to find peace asking why. But you'll find peace when you start asking what. God, what are you doing? I want to be sensitive to that. The next one is this. God sees trials as a way to provide shelter. Psalms 91, verses 1 through 3 is a great verse here. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. What's that whole chapter there about? Protection. And if we're all honest and we would drop the pride in our own lives, every one of us that's living and breathing in this room, or whether you're on social media watching right now, we long for protection. You say, well, I'm the one that provides protection for my family. You do, but you long for it too. We want protection in our marriage. We want protection in our job. We want security there. We want protection in our resources. We want protection with our home. We long for protection. And where you don't find protection, you'll find someone who's not able to function properly. You take a quarterback in football. If he does not feel protected by the O-line and by the running backs and those that are there, if he does not feel protected, what will he do? He'll start throwing the ball away. He'll start making stupid choices that are not wise. Why? Because he's afraid of getting hit. And it's hard for us to function in life if we don't feel protected. We'll start making a lot of crazy choices because we don't feel protected. And so therefore you have to guard against that. In the Middle East, shepherds who have sheep who constantly wander away in danger, whether it's from wild animals or a cliff, whatever it may be, what does that shepherd do in love? Sometimes they'll take that sheep and they'll break their leg. Why? To protect them from greater danger. Let me go on record. I've never broken any of my kids' legs before, okay? You don't have to worry about it, man. What kind of punishments he bringing to his kids? But we find that here with the sheep, that it protects them from greater harm. And sometimes we face those difficulties because of things that we've done, or sometimes it's because of doing the right thing. We can do the right thing and still face the bump when we're all in and we make the right choice, but then we still face the bump, right? We still face the question of we get the phone call, what's next? What do we do? And so it's still there, so we have to learn how to respond to it and respond with integrity, respond with character, and respond and say, God, I'm all ears, I'm all eyes. What are you teaching me in this moment? 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17, for it is better, if it's God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20 is a great verse of Joseph's life after all that he went through with his brothers and family and falsely accused and all of those things. He said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And so maybe you're all in and you're saying, God, I want to be all in, and you hit that roadblock or that bump in the road. And what do you say? God, how are you protecting me right now? What are you teaching me? Because it may be that God's protecting you from something. And all of that brings to this last one. It all works together for this because God uses those things to bring perfection. The correction, the shelter, all of that, the direction, all those things, it's pointing in one direction, and it's pointing to bring about perfection in our lives, to make us in His image, to help grow us spiritually, to become more like Christ. And I'm learning this more and more, that my greatest spiritual development doesn't happen on the sunny days. It just doesn't. On the sunny days, I'm doing my own thing. My greatest spiritual development happens on the dark days when things aren't going good in life and there's nowhere to turn but have a dependence on God. And so maybe you go all in and you hit that first roadblock and you're questioning and you're upset and you want to quit. You don't want to serve on that team, or you don't want to do this anymore, and you get frustrated for whatever reason. I want you to hear that. You need to realize that in that moment, God may be trying to perfect you and work through that. And many times we miss being perfected. Why? Because we continue down the same pattern over and over again. And the very thing that's discouraging you this morning may be the very thing that God's trying to use to develop you. But you won't let it because you keep fighting it. Pain is the high cost of growth, right? We want the growth. We want to see the success. We want to see the product, but we don't want the process, right? We want those things. You want the six-pack. You want the abs. But you don't want to go to the gym and eat right and do all those other things. There's things we want, but we don't want to go through the process to get it. And God's trying to perfect us, and many times He's bringing about perfection and going through the things that we don't want to go through. But that's where God's refining us and He's growing us. We want to grow, but we don't want to grow in pains, right? And so we have to surrender that. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10 says, "And the God of all grace, who called you into this eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered for a little while, will Himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." Romans 5, 3-4. "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance." Right? That helps me get around the track another time after I've lost my breakfast. I learn to persevere and make it through those things, right? I grow and I develop. Perseverance brings about character. Starts developing, right? It's internally who we are. And then that brings about what? Hope. It's allowing God to use those things that you've been fighting for so long. I was sharing this last week, and then I'm living it this week. I was telling the people last week at Overflow that many times our problem is not the problem that we have. Our problem is the very thing of this. It's the way we respond to the problem that we have. The problem's not the problem you have in front of you. The problem's how you're going to choose to respond to it. So you go all in and you're moving forward and you hit this problem. It's very easy to want to cast blame. He did this, she did this, they did this, or even I did this to myself, and now I'm living with that guilt, right? I did this. And you're living with that guilt of he did, she did, or even I did. But I want you to see this. The problem is not the problem. The problem is how you choose to what? Respond. How you choose to respond to the problem. That's what you have to focus on. God, how am I going to respond to this problem? How am I going to respond to the phone call I got this week? How am I going to respond when things don't work out the way that I want to go? How do I respond when I get the news at the doctor of what's going on with my health? How do I respond when I find myself in this financial situation? How do I respond? And it may be something someone else has done, someone you've done, whatever it may be. Get over the problem and begin to look at how do I respond to this problem. That's the problem with the Israelites in the Old Testament. For 40 years, what should have taken 2 weeks. Why? Because they kept responding the wrong way over and over again. And here's what that causes. I'm all in, baby. I'm all in. My first roadblock happens, and what do? I quit. And then I come back and I go, I'm all in. I'm all in this time. And you come back and what happens? We quit because it gets difficult. I'm all in every January. Man, I'm going to get healthy. Whatever it may be. I'm all in. I'm going to start saving money. And then something hits. I'm all in. I'm going to have a better relationship, and I'm going to be a better parent with my kids, and I'm going to spend time with them, and I'm going to do this. I'm all in. And then something happens. And we start over. And the real breakthrough happens, watch this, is when you hit the roadblock, when you're all in, and you push through it. And when you push through it, there's where freedom takes place. That's where spiritual development happens, because you're not making the pattern again. You're walking into the next level, the next place that God has for you in your relationship with your spouse and with your kids and with your job and all of those things. But you've got to push through and stay all in and don't quit. Look to the person beside you and say, do not quit. Don't quit. You've got to be all in. The problem is not your problem. It's how you what? How you respond. How you choose to respond to the problem. You can respond with becoming bitter and angry and resentful. Or you can respond and say, God, whatever you want, whatever you're doing, I'm listening. And I'm going to be obedient. And I'm going to walk through the doors. Every door that you open, everything, I'm going to be obedient. And God, I'm dependent on you to walk me through that. And we trust Him and Him alone and not our own. And it's oftentimes in the darkest days that we see the greatest development in our spiritual growth. With every head bowed, and every eye closed, I'm so thankful that I'm able to be here this morning. Thankful for this church and the staff and the pastors and the ministry that's represented here and throughout this community and what God's doing. And so as we make those commitments to be all in, man, I need to do this. I want to honor God with my resources. I want to honor God with my time. I want to honor God with showing up more in the house of God and fellowship. And I want to honor God with my relationships and all those things and serving and being all in. Be prepared when the roadblocks come and say, I'm not going to be defeated by this roadblock, but I'm going to push through it because that's where spiritual development takes place. I'm not going to get caught up living my entire life in a pattern for 40 years, wandering and never making it to the next place. But I'm going to be committed, and I'm going to push through. And I promise you that's where breakthrough happens. That's where spiritual development happens. That's where leadership happens. That's where growth happens. So, Father, I pray for everyone that's here in different walks of life, in different seasons. Lord, some of them may be just making another lap around the track. Some of them may be there for a while. Some of them may have already made it through and to the next place, and they've already experienced some of those things. Lord, help us to be reminded of your love, your mercy, your grace, your forgiveness. And Lord, may we walk in that grace and realize that you are our shield, you're our protector, you provide direction for us, you provide all of those things. And we just trust in you. So Lord, help us to live a life of what instead of why. Help us not to put ourselves as a victim. But Lord, help us to put ourselves in a place to realize that you are growing and developing us into who you want us to be. And we're simply on a journey, and we set up our plans, and God, you establish our steps along the way. Help us to see that way so we can respond and grow. And I pray for freedom, Father, and I pray for people being set free and lives to be changed and marriages to be restored and your Holy Spirit to move in a powerful and mighty way in our lives as we surrender daily. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's stand to our feet.